All right, passage number 10, last passage, hooray! Here we go. So we got Taoism and Buddhism, Taoism, Buddhism, Taoism. So it seems as though it's like more religion, philosophy, so humanities. Let's jump into it. Being able to integrate these two approaches may not be entirely impossible, because it could be the case that the inability of a conscious being to reconcile their apparent lack of agency over nature of things is the fundamental source of the endless suffering that Buddhists take as their foundation. Okay, so the juxtaposition between Taoism and Buddhism, which both attempt to examine the same phenomenon of life, highlights their different conclusions. A goal to embrace the tension of life in the case of Taoism, and a goal to escape the tension of life in the case of Buddhism. So basically, yes, so this is humanity, so there has to be some sort of an opinion that the author is sort of suggesting here. So so this thing is saying that being able to integrate is not impossible, right? So just because these things, both of these things have different conclusions, different goals, doesn't mean that it's not impossible to integrate them. Okay, and so how the author integrates them is by saying that our inability to reconcile our apparent lack of agency is what causes the endless suffering that Buddhists take on as our foundation. So so basically not being able to embrace the tension of life leads to the endless suffering that I guess Buddhism promotes or describes. So let's see some shifts in tone. So I know there's one over here. Let's see. So Taoism reflects. So this seems a bit contextual. This seems a bit contextual as well. So, but the context kind of Buddhism and Taoism are starting to mention over here. Nothing about Buddhism and Taoism over here. So there's probably a shift in tone somewhere over here, and then the obviously there's one over here as well. So we do that outline real quick, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So either the first shift in tone is somewhere up here, or it begins really down here. So we're going to come to the top and pause, ask yourself some questions, restate the thesis. So the thesis is again that, hey, yes, Buddhism and Taoism are different, but the author says it's that we're able to integrate them. Imagine you're sitting motionless, cross-legged on the floor of your room. At what point would you move from that position? You can begin to imagine the forces that get you to move as either being internal or external. Hunger pangs or an itch may cause you to move just as much as a knock on the door or a ringing of an alarm. In most, if not all cases, there is a source of tension that gets you to move on to the next activity in your life. This flow of tension and resolution permeates the cycles of day-to-day life. It has been happening since before your birth and will continue to happen after your death. So this is something that the author definitely considers as the truth. And so let's see. So Buddhism and Taoism are two religions which both attempt to face this omnipresence. Their attitudes and approaches toward the immovable forces of life, however, are quite different. So there's that shift in tone. And let's see how it relates. So it relates to the conclusion basically by saying again, like, yes, they are different. So they are different in their approaches. But the conclusion ends up saying that they're different in their approaches, sure, but that still doesn't mean that we aren't able to integrate them. So I guess they kind of relate. So let's see. So how are they different in their approaches? So for Buddhists, the activities of life revolve around the never-ending attempt at satisfying desires. Their concept of dukkha describes the first of their Four Noble Truths. It explores the realness of suffering. Considering that suffering is the focus of their interpretation of the flow of life, naturally their way of living is to be void of all desires which may lead to suffering. An enlightened Buddhist has managed to separate himself or herself from the need for satisfaction. It's about separating, which again correlates to the goal down here where we know it's about escaping the tension of life. So Taoism reflects on this flow as the natural order of life, right? Just like, they embrace it. It's natural. So their attitude toward the uncontrollable forces of life is one of acceptance. As a result, a Taoist way of living tends toward harmony with this natural order, whereas Buddhism provides a clear framework for how precisely to live. Taoist philosophy tends to be more vague and subjective. It's only concerned with understanding and harmonizing with the natural order of things, in whichever way intuitively feels the the most harmonious ought to be the way to live. So again, basically, this sets up about what the same phenomenon of life is. This sets up the difference between Buddhism and Taoism, and this sort of concludes that yes, they are different, and yes, they're talking about the same thing, and because they're talking about the same thing, maybe we can integrate them by saying that our inability to reconcile this phenomenon, this tension of life, might be our source of endless suffering. So maybe we can integrate it in that way. Okay. So what does the author most likely mean by immovable forces? So again, it's just in paragraph 2, right? So you find it talks about immovable forces over here. So let's look in a context. So true religion would attempt to face this omnipresence, right? So what is that omnipresence? It's talking about this, which is the source of tension that gets you to move to the day-to-day life, flow of tension that permeates cycles of day-to-day life. That's basically it. So the causal factors of behavior beyond a person's control, that's good. Life's inescapable of suffering, no. Four Noble Truths, no. Desire to escape the endless tensions of life, that's a little bit of a rationalization. It's just about the causal factors of behavior beyond a person's control. So immovable forces of life. What is the author's conclusion? Again, you can integrate the two things. So Taoism and Buddhism both attempt to examine the same phenomenon of life. That's not bad. The different ways of living prescribed by Taoism and Buddhism are compatible. Yes, so that's a little bit more accurate, that although they are different, they are also compatible. So I like B more. The flow of tension and resolution permeates the cycles of daily life. Again, that's more of a claim. These are more like claims. Whichever way intuitively feels right. Nope, that's just describing Taoism. So B is the conclusion. What is the most likely reason for the author's description of dukkha? Let's see. So we find it in the passage. The cause of dukkha describes the first of their Four Noble Truths. So, yeah, I mean, it would just be basically just giving an example of why Buddhists, think that life revolves around this, and it talks about, setting up basically this claim over here, which is that suffering is the focus of their interpretation of life. So it seems as though that's what it's useful for. So in terms of the argument itself, the claims that are being made around this sentence here about dukkha have to do with the author telling us that Buddhists revolve themselves around suffering, and that's basically it. So let's see. So to provide a contrast to the Taoist view of reality, not so much. To support the claim that suffering is the focus, yeah, that's much better. To clarify that the Buddhist way of living can be integrated, no, that claim doesn't really happen until the conclusion, so it's not clarifying a claim that hasn't even been made yet. To emphasize the lack of control that a person has against the natural flow of life, I'd say B is the strongest answer here. So what is the author's tone towards Taoism? Again, it's relatively neutral, actually, in this situation. So it wouldn't be negative, it wouldn't be positive. So those are gone. So it's more neutral as opposed to, curious is kind of a little bit, positive as well. Expository is more descriptive and neutral, so I'd say D is better. And how would a Buddhist respond to someone suffering from homesickness? So suffering from homesickness, so their response to this is to escape, is to try to escape, basically. And what does the enlightened Buddhists say? They manage to separate him or herself from the need for satisfaction. So that's sort of the idea. Separating yourself from that underlying need. So ignoring the feeling of homelessness until it dissolves. No, you're not ignoring it. Submitting to an unyielding weight of the feeling of suffering. That's a little bit better than A. So A is gone. To accept the feeling as a temporary part of the nature of things. No, that's very Taoist, not Buddhist. And to remove the source of desire that leads to their suffering. Yeah, so definitely not submitting. Definitely to remove the source of desire that leads. Okay, excellent. We did it. Let me pause this here. There we go. All right. So in this situation, the passage a little bit shorter of a passage, but not as opinionated as I would have expected from a philosophy, religion type of a passage. So that's a bit refreshing considering some of the other difficult philosophy passages that we've experienced. And so essentially, but there was a contrast, right? There was an opinion. So the opinion was again over here. But as we saw, basically this is a bit of context. This is some more context, but specific details about the difference between Buddhism and Taoism. And then the fact that they are different is sort of the context that the author uses to then say, hey, you can still integrate them. So I would say in this situation, you look at the problems you have. This is reasoning within the text. This is foundations of comprehension. This is reasoning within the text. This is foundations of comprehension, and this is reasoning beyond the text. So pretty good balance there. In terms of the immovable forces, again, it has to do with what were the claims made, usually before the use of this example. So in paragraph 2, you say the immovable force of life. The claim that's being made in that situation is about how the approaches are. Oh wait, so it's saying what does it mean? Oh, so it's not about the role. It's about what does this word mean. So we have to use context clues. So what is the context clue? So what is this referring to? So it's referring to the immovable forces. So the immovable forces refer to this omnipresence. This omnipresence refers to the flow of tension and resolution. So this flow of tension and resolution. This flow of tension and resolution refers to the source of tension that gets you to move, right? And then again, so the sources of tension that gets you to move, that gets you to do things, that are basically what it is. So the causal factors of behavior, right? That's what that is. So life's inescapable suffering, again, when it comes to the author and what the author's viewpoint is, life's inescapable suffering would be a Buddhist's point of view, not the author's. The desire to escape the endless tensions of life would be a Buddhist point of view, not the author's. The author's point of view refers, if you just hop from here to there, to there, to there, you can backtrack it all the way to what the author's voice is, which is in paragraph 1, that it talks about the sources of tension that get you to move. The author's conclusion, again, right here, about being able to integrate it, the two philosophies. And so the difference between A and B, it's a tough question, right? So Taoism and Buddhism both attempt to examine the same phenomenon of life. This is basically a claim that's made, yes. But, just because they both attempt to examine, that doesn't really highlight any sort of main point. The main point is that although they have different ways of living, right, it's still not impossible to integrate them. So this tacks on both of those components. So because it's more components that it tacks on, so it has like 2 points versus just 1, then B is definitely stronger than A, and that's how you can cross off A. So it's the same reasoning with D. D is just a claim. It's one claim, but it's not really the main point. So all these other things are claims. A, C, and D are claims. B is, sort of the two-pronged sort of shift plus that conclusion. So they're different, yes, but they're still compatible. That's much more comprehensive in terms of the conclusion. Most likely reason for description of dukkha. So you find it, and you look at the context. You look at the claims surrounding it. So the claims around there being that so the activities of life revolve around the never-ending attempt at satisfying desires. Their concept of dukkha describes the first of their Four Noble Truths. It explores the realness of suffering, considering that suffering is the focus. So yes, so there's a claim. So the claim would be So these are descriptive for sure. I would say that the author's sort of voice is coming out here by saying, considering that suffering is the focus of blah, 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 naturally there are ways. So the author is sort of giving you this concept and then using it as a setup to make this claim here. And so that's basically what this means. Supporting the claim. So what is the author's tone? Again, it's more neutral, it's not taking one side over the other, so it can't be A through C. D is at least a little bit the most neutral, even compared to C. And how would Buddhists respond to someone suffering from homesickness? Again, according to the author, they would try and separate themselves from the need of satisfaction, right? So separating yourself from the need for satisfaction. So being able to remove the source of desire. So separating the need that leads to their suffering, right? The need for home, being home, trying to remove that as the source of desire that leads to their suffering, which is sort of the idea of Buddhism as explained in the passage. So in any case, guys, I hope that this has been helpful, and if, like I said, you want to make sure that you are drilling the exercises, that you can do these passages more than once, especially as you begin to get the strategies a bit more secure in your mind. You'll be having the strategy cheat sheets with you. If you memorize them, you'll just write them down in your scratch paper at the beginning of the tutorial section. Just in that 10-minute tutorial at the beginning of the cars section when you sit down for the real exam. And so in those 10 minutes, you can write down the main categories, the main passage types, the approaches to each of those things, the general sort of process for reading each of those passages, some tips and tricks for answer choice selection and reasoning and logic. And you can write those down on your cheat sheet so that you can have this as a guide, and it'll be like you had me there with you, guiding you along through the exam, telling you what to do when certain situations happen. So you'll have this with you as you go, and that's a good thing, right? So you'll be able to utilize that to your advantage, but obviously you don't want to need it. You want to make sure you practice it. So when you're doing your practice sessions, use your notes. It'll be like an open note test, because you'll have the ability, it's not cheating, you'll have the ability to use these cheat sheets on the actual exam. All you have to do is memorize the cheat sheets, write them down in your scratch paper, and you'll have them in front of you with you as you go through. So that's one thing. And again, when it comes to all the other mental stamina tactics, strategies, all the fundamentals, time management, things like that, go through all the other exercises and really make sure that you're able to interpret the main idea and the main conclusions, be able to recognize what kind of problem types you're going after, what processes you'll use to solve those types of problems, and being able to improve your answer choice reasoning ability, and so that you get used to being able to bracket and eliminate and making sure that you're determining the strongest answer for bracket every time. And all of the combination of those exercises and those drills will enable you to be more fluid when you approach a passage from here on out. So again, if you need any help, just shoot some questions over in the Reddit community, and you'll get your answer soon. Best of luck. I hope this was helpful, and I'll see you in the other parts of the course. Take care.